75 years of peace in Europe flushed down the toilet because of the ambitions of one guy and what he can do. So I broke the talk into two parts. I'm going to ask Martha to noodle something in between. First is diagnosis and options for treatment. War is a social disease, and it does moral damage. And so part one, I'm going to be exploring the dimensions of the kind of moral damage that war causes. And I've been at this since 1968, 55 years. We have a couple of centuries of experience in this room. So I'm going to keep my part focused and then pause and invite you to chime in with your own experiences of the moral damage that you might have felt directly or indirectly in the last week. And then part two is kind of a checklist for possible repairs. And again, after I'm done yakking, I'm going to pause and invite your contributions so that we can be reminded that we're in this together. And let's face it, those of us in this country have a pretty easy part to play. No bombs falling, no apartments and hospitals and schools shelled, no people or buildings reduced to rubble. We can, and I believe we must, stand with Ukraine, but we don't have to watch our homes and our cities being reduced to dust. So here's the first dimension of moral damage. War breeds lies. It feeds on lies. And with enough lying, as many of us know from our family of origin, trust disappears. In the midst of war, many of us, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, are held captive by lies and myths and wishful thinking. And it produces, I believe, cognitive impairment and emotional numbing. For example, President Putin has a vision of the history of Ukraine that is fanciful and self-serving. Ukraine was not created by Russia or the Soviet Union. It has been a nation state since 892, over 1,000 years. And there's also a problem built into the structure of dictatorships. I think of dictatorships like a pyramid of power. And if you give the guy at the top too much power, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the critical thinking, has great difficulty operating. We had examples of this in our own country in the 60s and 70s. And if you look at Bill Moyer's biography of his time with Lyndon Baines Johnson, there came a time when Lyndon Baines Johnson called the top generals into a room and said, "Why can't we win this thing in Vietnam? We're spending millions of dollars. We got thousands of our boys over there, and I'm spending political capital. Why ain't we winning this thing?" And according to Moyer's, one general, and there's no record of his name, which is probably just as well, said, "Well, you know, Mr. President, I think part of the problem might be that some of those people over there think it's their country. Where is the general? Where is among the brilliant political scientists of Russia who can stand up in public or private and say, Mr. President, they believe it's their country, not ours. We may be one people, but we are two nations. Could we live with that?" So that's the first layer of moral damage. It numbs us emotionally, it interferes with knowing what's true, and as somebody said, if people can convince us of absurdities, they can persuade us to commit atrocities. Second dimension of moral damage. War accentuates the us-them mindset. And one humanity, what the poet John Donne called the continent of humankind. This is so appropriate that you come in just as I'm quoting John Donne. And I bet I'm not the only person, and this is a guilty pleasure moment. I bet I'm not the only person in the room that has taken unreasonable delight in watching the Ukrainians blow up Soviet tanks, and Soviet anti-missile devices, and Soviet this and Soviet that. Television, particularly on YouTube, can become YouTube gaming. And if we are to pull against the current, we need to constantly remember that many of those Russian soldiers are very young men. And they were sent to the Ukraine after being told, oh, this is just a training exercise, will be done in 2 or 3 days, and you'll be welcomed by beautiful women who will throw sunflowers at you. Third element of moral damage, and this also is linked directly to our first UU principle, war reduces the inherent worth and dignity of persons, and it replaces it with a cold-hearted calculus of body counts and resources consumed and cost-benefit analyses. Our job in response might be to keep focusing attention on the human lives lost, the cities and the sacred places destroyed, and insist that all lives matter, not just life in vitro, but friends and foes, human and non-human, Ukrainian and Russian and everybody else that's caught in that mess. Fourth dimension of moral damage. War wastes resources, destroys capital of all kinds, destroys infrastructure, and every nation needs that. And it was a progressive Republican who I like, Eisenhower, who wrote and said in his final address, every time we spend a dollar on war, it is an act of theft from dollars better spent for food, shelter, health care, and infrastructure, like the interstate highway system. Fifth dimension of moral damage. War fills our natural world, including our bodies, with toxins. And you know how an ecosystem works. If you get enough toxin in an ecosystem, it is transmitted everywhere, and there is no safe haven unless you can move on to another eco niche. Instead of cherishing life, war destroys it. And usually for dreams of recovering past glory and delusions of grandeur. And whether you call it restoring the greater Deutschland, or making America great again, or restoring the glory of Mother Russia and the former Soviet Union, it's a phony dream that costs tens of thousands of lives. And I wonder, is Russia the first nation to nuke, or to shell a nuke plant? The fires have gone out for now. I hope they will not be started again. And what will become of the site of Chernobyl, site of the largest nuke disaster that we have so far witnessed? Will it be kept safe, or will it be weaponized? So those are 5 dimensions of the moral damage. And of course, I'm talking about them separately because that's how our brains work most of the time. But they interact together and form this nexus of mutually assured destruction. So before we have an interlude, let me turn to you. What are some other dimensions of moral damage that you have experienced in this latest war, or one of the many wars of the last 50, 60, 70, 80 years? Yes?
I watched on YouTube Zelensky as he was participating in Dancing with the Stars.
Huh.
And it had so many different episodes, and it showed different dances from different countries and different types. And when it showed his face now,
Hmm.
and I started to cry.
Yeah.
I dance. Fortunately, some of us are able to dance on a Saturday now in a new group.
Mm-hmm.
Krista, part of it. And, I'm holding my hand. But the human interaction, the community of people's bodies moving to express themselves. We weren't in unison necessarily. We were individually dancing, but we were together.
Yeah.
And to think of this beautiful human being with the quality of his dancing, he's not a dancer. You kind of see that in his body. He's still one, but to know what he's doing. It kind of puts that arrow in my heart.
Yes, that's the arrow. Thank you, Lou. Any other dimensions of moral injury that you have either thought about or seen or experienced yourself? Yes, Prescott.
I think one of the things that strikes me is how indignant the West is, the Western culture, and yet when we went in and attacked Iraq
Yeah.
without any provocation, based
Yeah.
on lies, and killed
Yeah.
tens or hundreds of thousands of people,
Yeah.
and left radioactive weapon shells,
Yeah.
we justify it based on lies, and I think we are so blind to American exercise of power, some kind of righteous feeling that why we did it, which, from my perspective, was all about greed. But anyway, our son was in Italy, and Europe during another World War in their back door. He was pointing out how, because that was in the Middle East, it was somehow removed, people don't look like us, whatever. It didn't look like the majority European population, how we could just say, oh, well, I think it just blinds us, blinds people.
Yeah, and that blindness, the inability to see our own shadow and a willingness to project it on someone that's as good as playing that part as Putin, keeps us from growing up morally. It's a kind of moral, I guess retardation is no longer a popular view, but let's say we have a moral learning disability. We have great difficulty remembering what happened in Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan. And I was talking, I think, to somebody before the service when Obama was doubling down on Afghanistan. I sent him several emails that said, Mr. President, why do you think the Brits called Afghanistan the graveyard of empires? No learning occurred, even with an incredibly bright president. Could you play us an interlude, because I want to get on to treatment?
Can I do?
Yes, of course, Chris.
I think of the moral damage of the atrocities that soldiers see and are forced to commit.
Yeah.
And I have to think that's a lifetime impact.
Yeah, and if you've worked with vets, if you have vets in your family, it is a life sentence. In most cases. Thomas?
Yeah, I'd like to throw this in too. I recently read that the United States weapons manufacturers supply about, I think the figure was 40% of the world's weapons. So when I see the conflict going on right now with, and I'm not making moral equivalences here, but both sides using weapons, I'll bet you anything that some of the weapons that are killing Ukrainians are made in this country. So to me, being part of the permanent wartime economy that has persisted in this country since World War II is one of our huge moral injuries.
Yeah, I agree. And Eisenhower, I think, called that, he was one of the first people to talk about the military-industrial complex, which figures out a way to turn the weapons of death into profits for them. Surprise. You want to give us an interview?
Mm-hmm.
inspiration on remedies, and I'm just talking about a single bandwidth of remedies, from John Lennon's song Imagine. So the healing power that I'm going to be focusing on is the human imagination. It's how we use 2 or 3 parts of our brain to create multi-dimensional pictures that speak simultaneously to our head, to our heart, to our mind, to our bodies, through our senses. This is how we can create a common world. This is how we can honor the interdependent web of all existence. And this is a good chance for the second image. Street art. In the 9 days of war, there have been thousands of artists out on the street creating art, and look. The eye that sees is always also us. And the colors of the Ukrainian flag, and a tear. I could talk for hours. That image says it very clearly. And there's another image that I did not want to display, but I want to invite you to look for. It's a picture of a chasm in a city, of bombed out buildings. And if you look very carefully, in the center of the chasm is an artist painting sunflowers. Van Gogh. That is the power of art. We can also use imagination to realize the best in others and in ourselves. And there's a wonderful, I don't know how many of you have watched Mr. Rogers, who's, if you could get a PhD in emotional intelligence, he would have one. And Mr. Rogers has these imaginative exercises. And one of them is, imagine that when you meet a person, see if you can see them at their best. See if you can imagine them on the best day of their life. The way they are seen by a loving parent or grandparent, by a dear friend, or a loving spouse. And sometimes, and this is the words that go with that picture, sometimes we can use imagination in a public way that remind us of how intimately all lives are connected. And, the palm of the hand, 4 fingers and an opposing thumb, that's one of the defining characteristics of all humankind. One race. Not 4, not 5, not 3, not 37. One race. It's called the human race. Imagination is also a way to craft and focus our attention with or without the use of some larger power. And one of the things I've been doing in the midst of this war is almost once a day find a traditional prayer and turn it into a peace prayer. And some of my favorite prayers come from the Buddhist tradition. And 2,500 years ago, the Buddhists decided it is entirely possible to pray without focusing so much attention on the higher power. And what Buddhist prayer do is they have kind of their prayers of the horizontal connections. They're prayers that focus on the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part, principle number 7. And one of the most lovely Buddhist prayers that I do by day and by night, and when I wake up in the middle of the night, is, may all beings be well and free from disease. May all beings be kind and free from aggression. May all beings be awake and free from delusion. And may all beings live in peace, liberty, and justice. Principle number 6. And I find if I say that several times a day, maybe several dozen times a day, it's like taking the imperfect instrument that I am and tuning up and attuning myself to the key of shalom. We can also plant the seeds of moral awareness in our face-to-face conversations and in social media. And this is where the little water drop comes in. Yeah. So one of the things I've been doing as we've been entering the war zone is try to be a little more attentive to the face-to-face interactions. Slow them down when I can. Reduce my reactiveness if I can. And infuse those transactions with careful attention, thankful attention, resolving what I can, and when I run into something that is beyond my capacity to resolve, I let it go. And if you've been on the internet, you've seen another use of the power of imagination. There have been tens of thousands of images posted to Facebook and TikTok and who knows where, promoting peace, discouraging the use of violence, reminding us that war is a problem, not a solution. Fourth, public witness. When we meet face to face, when we stand up for our values in public spaces, we create waves of positive values. And next slide, I think. This is from St. Petersburg, Putin's hometown. Thousands of people turned out. And it wasn't just to, get high and say hi to the neighbors. They were putting their lives at risk by demonstrating for peace against war in Putin's hometown. Lots of children attempted to carry flowers and put them at the Ukrainian embassy. Some of them were arrested. When we speak up for peace and justice, when we stand up for peace and justice, we come more fully into our lives and our values begin to resonate through the public sphere we create together. And I'm wondering, as someone who enjoyed participating in the Advent walk that Thomas and Krista and Colleen and other people worked on, if it's possible to have a peace walk in River Falls. It's a wonderful format for witnessing, for walking, for poetry, for music. We can do this. Maybe even we should do it. Fifth remedy is to continually use the power of compassion to imagine strangers as friends we do not yet know, and enemies as colleagues and neighbors, and in some cases family that we have become estranged from. And there's a wonderful true story, and this is the next clip. The gal with the purple hair in Ukrainian we would call her an auntie, even though she has purple hair. And an auntie or a titanka in Ukrainian is a woman about your mother's age who steps in when your mom is not there and does what needs to be done. So they're talking to a captured Russian soldier, probably 18, 19, 20. In his hand, one hand, he's got a little teacup. They gave him fresh, piping hot tea. They're giving him a huge sweet roll he's got in his other hand, because maybe he hasn't been fed for 2 to 3 days. They're using their cell phone so he can call mommy back in Russia and say, "I'm okay, Mom." And now the aunties are offering free one-way tickets. Just get your ticket and ride back to Russia. But only if Mom will meet their sons at the station, and they promise not to come back to Ukraine as a soldier. That's peacemaking in a very tangible, hands-on way. Maybe the aunties need to lead, or the grandparents, or the uncles. One last dimension of moral remedy is giving tangible help. And I'm not going to give you a list of, I'll name a few organizations. There's a wonderful website called givers.org. If you want to give money to have it to do something useful, you can type in the name of Doctors Without Borders or the International Red Cross, or the Ukraine Crisis Fund, or UNICEF, and get a brief report of the quality of their work and how much of the money you give actually goes to what they say it will be used for. But giving tangible help, hopefully in a nonviolent way. There are days when I'd like to give a drone or two, but not today. This is Sunday. So all of those elements I mentioned, I talked again about them again one at a time, but they are part of a system, part of a ring of power. And the good news is when we connect the dots, when we start using all of those gates of imagination, a tremendous power for good is released into our world. And the networks in which we live and move and have our being are infused with the values that we hold dear. Peace and justice, compassion and truth-telling, human unity and ecological common ground. I want to end with the image of the sunflowers. And we brought some sunflower seeds with us. We invite you to take some home. This is bird seed, so maybe not for eating, but I want to tell you some stories about why sunflowers are so important in Ukraine. First, they grow there like topseed. And Ukraine is one of the biggest producers of sunflowers in Europe. They also have discovered that they're very useful around Chernobyl or radioactive sites in drawing some of the toxins out. And the colors of the Ukrainian flag, gold and yellow, or blue above gold, can be seen as a field of sunflowers or wheat with a blue sky above it. And the sunflowers, it turns out, after they were used at Chernobyl, became a worldwide image of nuclear disarmament. And in 1996, the Ukrainian government decided to give back to Russia 1,900 nuclear warheads. They gave back all they had, and at the end, they did a little ceremony, and the Ukrainian Minister of Defense and the Russian Ministry of Defense planted sunflower seeds together to remind them. They were neighbors. They were family. One people, but two nations. And most recently, the gift of sunflower seeds is something that the aunties and grannies are giving to these young, captured Russian soldiers. And there's a hard edge to this. The hard edge is, here, dearie, have some sunflower seeds to keep in your pocket, and if you die here, at least something beautiful will grow with you. But another possibility is, here, dearie, take some sunflower seeds, and if you're feeling generous, give them to the birds, because the birds love these dark sunflower seeds. And if you live, and if you get to go home to Russia in one piece, plant some sunflower seeds back home in your country. Plant something beautiful in your country, not ours. So I invite you to take some sunflower seeds with you and put them to good use. Feed them to the birds, plant them in the earth, keep some in your pocket to remind us how tender are the connections that bind us. May, if any of these words are true, may they abide with you now and in the days to come. I think we get to sing, right? And you don't get to sing this, we don't get to sing this sitting down, okay? Let's stand up and act like we're embodied to connect. We don't have to link arms if you don't want to, but we get to do this. And I think Thomas is going to lead
Yeah, it's just taking me a second here.
That's okay.
Make sure I-
We're not gonna hurry anywhere. We can be attuning ourselves to the key of peace and justice.
There are a lot of different verses to this song that you could sing, so I kind of put this one together to fit the occasion.